Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to my channel. Today I shall be reading a long story, so I hope you have patience for this. And it's based on the following 5 words. They will appear on the screen somewhere. Yeah, so it is called Ride Along. It seemed like a good idea at first, agreeing to be one of the test subjects for a radical new concept in online dating. And by radical, Piggyback Incorporated meant utterly unprecedented. Safi hadn't quite believed what she'd heard when she got the cold call back in September. "You're what?" she said, assuming she must have misheard. "We're trialling a neurological implant that links 2 consciousnesses together, allowing complete access to another person's thoughts, feelings, and emotions." "I see, and you think this is a good idea?" It had seemed a truly terrible notion when Safi first heard it. Even if it was possible, which it surely wasn't, was it really a good idea to allow anyone at all total access to every accidental, malformed, or deviant thought? How could that possibly make the intimate, terrifying, seemingly impossible task of meeting a life partner any easier? The research assistant who'd called her explained that she'd be part of a 2,000 volunteer study created by the University of Westminster's Neurophysiology and Neural Networking departments. The dating application was simply a sweetener they were using to help them find a group of willing and open-minded, in all senses, participants. It all sounded a bit sketchy to Safi, and she should definitely put the phone straight down. Yet somehow, she agreed to receive the literature and a call from one of the lead researchers in a week's time, all the while wondering why a truly forward-thinking group of scientists would resort to something as archaic as cold calling, on the telephone of all things. Then, a week later, she met up with Christina, a lifelong skeptic of all things technological, and to Safi's surprise, her acerbic friend was weirdly positive about the notion. "Are you kidding? That's a great idea. For you, that is." "What are you talking about?" said Safi. "Why for me?" "Think about it. You're totally neurotic, and surely even worse on a date. But what's causing that neurosis? It's your uncertainty about what the other person is thinking and feeling about you, what you're saying, how you're behaving, even what they think of your eyebrows, for Christ's sake. This way, you'll just know." Safi shook her head, half smiling. "It's not as simple as that," she protested. "They can't just overlay one consciousness over another, apparently. You get overload or feedback loops or something, as 2 people go about their days with another full person inside their head looking out. So they cut out your senses, put you in a kind of coma, then implant you in the head of another person. You're just a passenger. You can't control your host's actions, thoughts, or emotions." Seems a bit one-sided. It would be, except you sign an agreement where you take turns with the other person. You spend a certain period inside their head, and then you swap. "You see, that would be perfect for you. No uncertainty. You'd know in an instant what he thinks of you." "And he gets to know what I think," Safi said, her doubts building up again. Nevertheless, 1 month later, having attended an orientation seminar and undergone psychometric testing, Safi signed her participation agreement and checked her bank balance to find the £2,500 first instalment for the trial had already been deposited. Next, she scrolled through the online catalogue of male participants who'd already pre-selected her as a potential partner. There were 17 in total, which Safi hoped was a decent ratio, although the scientist hadn't told her how many men were in the initial pool of possibilities. This is high-stakes Tinder, she thought, narrowing her shortlist to 3. Then discarding Bob because of his beer gut, and Kurt due to his teetotal conservatism. That left Lionel, a pale-skinned, mixed-race 36-year-old man from Norwich, who worked as a cabinet maker and loved jazz, keeping fit, and the novels of Haruki Murakami. Lionel didn't sound like a freak, and she'd soon find out soon enough whether he was or not. She would be riding shotgun first, as the researcher put it. After her ride along, Lionel would share her experiences. The trial was for 3 days only, since it wasn't safe to continue the medically induced coma she'd be in for much longer. Safi was a little worried about the operation, but as the researcher explained, it was no more challenging than an appendectomy. They'd simply peel back a section of her scalp, drill a small hole in her forehead, and insert a tiny neural lace the size of a postage stamp. They would then slide the device over a section of her brain and activate it. The lace was attuned to the frequencies of a companion device already implanted in the host. It was powered by the heat from her own body and used their phone's 4G to transmit brainwave data. Lionel's lace would use his phone's Bluetooth to talk to her phone, and Safi's phone would connect to her lace. The communication link should take effect within half an hour after implantation. So I just slip off to sleep and then wake up in someone else's consciousness? Safi asked. That's the general idea. Now, a few ground rules. You won't be able to communicate with your host, although your host will of course be able to talk to you simply by thinking. We have built in a fail-safe, however, in case you need to sever the connection. Why would I want to do that? Safi asked, suddenly concerned. Oh, various reasons, said the researcher, quickly masking a moment of hesitation. Some subjects find the whole experience too strange, others experience a sort of psychic nausea, and then there are some who, well, you'll know if it happens. All you'll need to do is recite the lyrics of a favourite song and that'll snap you out of it. Do you have one in mind? Safi was still a little distracted by wondering what the researcher had considered giving as the third reason for dislocation, but now couldn't help hearing Sting's voice singing a song often mistaken for romantic, but actually about an obsessive stalker. I'll have every breath you take by the police. The researcher smirked slightly. Perfect choice. I'll set it up. Safi's consciousness came on stream when Lionel was in the shower. Oh shit, she heard him think. Or was it feel? I guess I should have known it would happen like this. Lionel managed to tilt his head up from his privates extremely quickly, but Safi still saw enough to discover he was adequately endowed. I'm so sorry, she started to respond, then remembered he couldn't hear her. I guess you can't reply. Yeah, I think they told me that. Why is this water always going cold? Christ, move it 1 millimetre and it scalds you. Fuck, there goes the shampoo. Now I'm swearing too much. You probably hate that. I need to finish up and get out of here. I'll just deal with the cold. Ah! I wonder if everyone's plumbing is this shit. Mine is, thought Safi in sympathy. I've such a good day planned. Tried to think of stuff we might both enjoy that won't make our heads literally explode. Sorry, I'm probably worrying you. And now I'm apologising too much and overthinking everything. What did the therapist say? Just be in the moment, don't editorialise. He turned off the water, stumbled out of the shower. Safi felt the shock of cold air on her penis, a lifetime first. To think if she transitioned a little earlier, she would have felt him washing it. Just as well he can't hear my thoughts, she added, for nobody's benefit but herself. Then Lionel went over to the mirror, a towel wrapped firmly around his waist, and she saw him for the first time. Well, she saw his face. He was even better looking in reality, or what species of reality this was an approximation for. His skin was a few shades lighter than hers, noble nose, tapering nostrils, thick eyebrows, foolish lips, a square jaw, a muscular neck and shoulders. Best of all, she could feel what it was like to possess those qualities. Being a man somehow feels more solid, she decided, less fluid. She felt springy and weighty at the same time. Weirdly, looking at the mirror, Safi felt a sensation from beneath the towel that presumably presaged an erection. Uh-oh. Narcissism or some strange enjoyment of her voyeurism? She shouldn't judge. The sort of thoughts she was already having. This was dangerously erotic. Hurry up and get your clothes on, Lionel, she thought. Taking the day off today, Lionel thought. I'm going to take you for my favourite walk and then we're going to lunch. Don't worry, it's veggie. I'm not going to make you tuck into a steak. I know some guys would take advantage to prove a point or some shit. Safi felt disappointed that she wasn't going to see him woodworking. It was something she'd always wanted to try herself. Still, he just scored all manner of points for not making her chow down a bloody ribeye. Lionel lived in Putney, as Safi discovered when he glanced out the window to check the weather. She saw the river and the unmistakable stone arcs of Putney Bridge. Lionel's flat was compact but tidy and well designed, with proper works of art on the wall and no piles of dirty clothes. Apart from a few woodworking tools and books, there were no other signs of his day job. Safi guessed he rented a studio somewhere, imagined it being one of those cute spaces built into the arches of bridges, like the boat builders at Richmond. Soon they were crossing the bridge, and Safi hoped Lionel was going to take her along the footpath by Bishop's Park. She'd always liked that elegant, unfussy garden with its rose beds, ornamental pond, and little kids playing football on the greens by Craven Cottage. It was a bit frustrating not being able to direct Lionel's attention where she wanted, but then this wasn't her virtual reality simulation after all, this was Lionel's actual reality. And what he was choosing to do with his attention seemingly was check his phone. Safi was disappointed until she realised he was flicking through pictures of her, the one she'd uploaded to Piggyback's site. She wasn't sure whether to be dismayed or pleased. Yes, sorry, this is going to seem kind of skeezy. No, I just wanted to look at your picture because, It helps me understand who I'm talking or thinking to. Does that make sense? Otherwise, I feel a bit mad having this monologue running through my head. Wow, she's cute. Look at that booty. I wouldn't mind just... Fuck, no, stop it. God, that sun's bright. Safi laughed, somehow, as the girl sashayed past, and reminded herself how liable she was to have her attention diverted by a square, stubbly jaw or a broad chest, even in the middle of a business meeting, or, yes, a date with someone else. And it was kind of reassuring to discover Lino had a fairly normal libido. Safi had once dated a man who declared himself asexual 3 weeks into their relationship, particularly annoying as they had already had sex twice. She didn't want any weird psychosexual complications this time. There was a further pleasant surprise as Lionel turned down the steps at the end of the bridge and headed into the very walkway Safi had in mind. She added imaginary points to his total. The rest of the walk was perfectly pleasant, if not as nice as actually being there in person, in terms of the sensation she was feeling. She couldn't quite feel Lionel's arms as her own, kept being distracted by the feeling of having so much hair there, the breeze ruffling it. However, Lionel turned out to be a very thoughtful and creative companion, knowing a surprising amount about the history of the gardens and the engineering challenges of the newly completed Fulham football ground rebuild. Plus, he was funny and observant. At one point, Lionel gestured to a bench full of uniformed schoolgirls, all silently lost in their phones. Like nuns with their hymn books, he thought, and Safi could see the image he was painting. They walked all the way to Hammersmith and then on through Chiswick, past the bandstands and weeping willows at Duke's Meadows, then over Barnes Bridge. Although it was still early April, the day was warm enough for there to be a host of drinkers lined up along the riverside embankment outside the Waterman's Arms. Lionel didn't take her there, though, even though she briefly thought a pint might be nice. Instead, Lionel headed into Barnes Village and found a little cafe with tables outside and a pretty garden where he ate a toasted feta cheese sandwich on focaccia with spinach, sun-dried tomatoes and pine nuts, washed down with some very good coffee. Strangely, Safi knew the coffee was good, even though she rarely drank it, finding espresso too bitter. Equipped with Lionel's taste buds, she was suddenly a connoisseur. During lunch, he flicked through his emails, explaining to Safi who everyone was, which ones were for clients, which from friends. The only email Safi noticed he didn't open was from someone called Louise, and even there he seemed to anticipate her question. Louise is my ex. She said she'd be in touch about returning some tools. I should read it, but I don't really want to. She always wants to tell me how unhappy she is and how much she misses me, and it makes me feel guilty and a bit manipulated. I hope that doesn't sound too harsh. Safi was glad he hadn't left it a complete mystery, but if they ever met, she'd have to do a bit of digging there. Lionel seemed good at compartmentalising and didn't have any more thoughts about Louise at all as he finished his meal. Instead, he sat watching some tiny birds hopping around a bush in the corner of the yard. For the second part of their walk, Lionel's mind had quietened. He mostly seemed to be looking around, taking pleasure in seeing other people enjoying this rare spring day. The privileged few who weren't stuck in offices, that is. They walked into the tree-shaded towpath between Barnes and Hammersmith, and Safi could feel a slight ache building up in his calves, as he quickened his speed. Was he trying to get the walk over with quickly? I usually speed up here, Lionel thought. There are fewer obstacles and you can get a good stride going. You're probably going to laugh, but I started doing meditation and mindfulness from an app recently, and I like practicing here. I just look at things and try not to have any thoughts, really, just sensations. You probably think I'm some sort of hippie. Not at all, thought Safi. I like that you're in touch with spiritual ways of being. Of course, Lionel couldn't hear her. Oh no, it was here, wasn't it? Something had formed. A memory? Except it couldn't be, because Safi had never been for a walk with anyone called Lou, who was maintaining an angry silence and making her feel guilty and bitter. Oh, of course, this wasn't her memory. This was Lionel's. It didn't feel quite right, like a melodrama shaped by his ego. The same towpath, but a much colder, wetter afternoon. The sky was a steely grey, and it had evidently just stopped raining. Lionel's hands were getting wet as he folded away the black umbrella and stuffed it into his coat pocket. He wondered if he should take Lou's hand to mollify her, but he didn't want to. Let her stew for a bit, after all she'd said. Are you sure we can go this way? He couldn't believe she had to ask. Hadn't she lived in Hammersmith for about 6 years? Yeah, I'll be fine. There's puddles everywhere. We'll walk around them. I'll carry you over them if I have to. Honestly, it's way quicker. Couldn't we just get a bus? This is supposed to be a walk, isn't it? Come on. Lionel stormed off ahead, knowing Lou would follow in her sky blue suede boots, in the mud, which he knew would only get worse as they reached those places the river flooded at high tide, where massive puddles formed that stretched entirely across the path. Fuck it was only a pair of boots. He'd maybe get them dry clean for her. "Lionel, wait, will you?" That was the only thing on their first date that Safi didn't enjoy. She felt Lionel's feelings of being belittled and made to feel small. She got it. He hadn't allowed himself to remember the argument in any detail, so she didn't know what had gone on prior to the memory of Lionel deliberately ruining Louise's shoes. But there was enough there to make it feel at least partly motivated. But it was also kind of petty and a really stupid thing to do. Regardless, Safi spent the rest of the 72 hours she'd be piggybacking on Lionel's consciousness, mostly enjoying his intelligence, his humour and his honesty. The following day Lionel spent in his studio, finishing making a sideboard from dark reclaimed hardwood recovered from old church pews. She loved the whole process of sawing, planing, chiselling, polishing and varnishing, finding it incredibly soothing. She could have done without some of the more extreme out-there jazz that Lionel liked to listen to, but the process of woodworking was fascinating. She'd never had such an insight into someone else's profession before. It occurred to Safi how much we talk about our jobs, yet how little we convey about what it's really like to do them. On her final day in Lionel World, he took a Zoom call with an American company that wanted him to help design a weird wooden box for a horror film they were making. Even that was kind of interesting, although Safi found her thoughts drifting towards the end. They had dinner with two of Lionel's friends that night, a white professional couple who looked like they probably voted Tory, but they were otherwise decent enough people. The young woman, Melissa, leaned into Lionel when her fiancé was in the bathroom and asked, with a hint of coquettishness, "So, are you seeing anyone at the moment?" If only she knew, Lionel thought, aiming it at Safi, yet flicking his eyes down to Melissa's cleavage, but without more than a fleeting erotic thought. Safi sensed a history there, but it was very much ancient history, nothing to concern herself with. That night, she found herself in bed slipping off to sleep with Lionel. She somehow always lost her consciousness when he did, and must remember to ask if that was by chance or design. And her hand reached down for his stiffening penis. Lionel gave it a few cursory strokes, but nothing more. Safi was somehow both relieved and disappointed. His restraint was admirable, though. In fact, there was a lot about him that was likeable. She loved that he read for an hour each night, his hands still smelling of the linseed oil he'd rubbed into a set of cabinet door handles he'd made on the lathe. The book was Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and he'd only just started it. Sure, he probably normally read books about Colombian drug cartels, and this was just for show, but at least he was trying. Lionel seemed to be enjoying the novel, and when he was done each night, instead of folding a page corner down, he used a receipt to mark his place instead. Safi had no idea why this was so important to her, but it was. When she was brought back to full consciousness in the clinical rooms at the university, Safi felt an immediate feeling of loss and confusion, like she'd awoken from a particularly vivid dream she'd mistaken for reality. "Don't worry, it'll pass within the hour," said the nurse, plumping the pillows behind her head and checking the pulse at her neck. She was right, and Safi returned to her daily routine, having taken 2 separate weeks off work for the experiment, with a working week between to let her get back to some state of normality. And yet, 1 week later, having gone back to the office and her admin job at the Burning Bright charity, a group protecting tigers in India, she couldn't help herself from wondering what Lionel was up to. She resisted texting him, not because it was forbidden by the experimenters, although it was, but because she didn't want to give him an unfair advantage. In just a few days' time, Lionel would have to immerse himself in her world. The experience was very different this time. Safi felt a presence in the periphery of her senses, like a vague, hazy corona, like distant whispers that might turn out to be the rustling of leaves. That ephemeral sensation, presumably, was Lionel. She half expected him to announce himself when, on the first morning, she poured herself a bowl of cereal and he came on stream. But of course, he could not. She'd got up at 6 a.m. to shower early, having as speedy a set of ablutions as possible. She'd rather not give him a free erotic show on day 1 of their acquaintanceship. "Hello, Lionel," Safi said when she felt him there. "I feel ridiculous thinking this, but I think it'd be worse if I spoke out loud, so bear with me. Have I really got no clean teaspoons? I could just use this one. It's clean enough. I know I'm a bit of a slob. I do wash up honest, every day, but maybe just once a day. Ow! Fucking hell! I'll have to knock that nail back down or call the landlord or something. Of course I'll do no such thing. Breakfast in bed. I know, I'm a creature of luxury. I should fit in a run as well. Maybe I will in a bit. I did just make breakfast, so I should really eat it. I'll go later, before lunch. I'll just check Facebook for a minute. After she'd eaten, Safi surprised herself by making good on her promise, running down to the canal at Brentford, then up alongside the slightly plastic-smelling water as far as the famous 3 bridges, actually 2 bridges, then up onto the roads down past Ealing Hospital and the viaduct, before turning for home at Hanwell. Only a 3-mile loop, but at 8-minute mile pace. She hoped Lionel was impressed, then cursed when she realised that he'd hear her think that. On day 2, she took Lionel shopping for presents for her mum and sister, whose birthdays were both the following week. A top for her mum, a cookery book for Lenny. She hoped he wasn't bored, then berated herself for her self-consciousness, then tried to distract herself from further self-deprecation by focusing on the music that was playing in Zara. The Police. I'll be watching. No! Safi dashed out of the store, explaining her reasoning to Lionel's silent presence. Soon she caught another earworm, which saved her from accidentally severing the connection. The cyclical melody emerged from a branch of Lush, Love Fool by the Cardigans. That's better. Shame what happened to the singer, Nina. Didn't she die? I'll check Wikipedia. Oh, apparently not. Who was it then? Someone from back in the 90s? Died a few years back? The Cranberries. Dolores, that was it. Shame though. I should have got something for me. My wardrobe needs a complete overhaul. I wasn't quite ready to give you a sneaky peek, you naughty man. God, I sound like a schoolmistress. I hope you don't think I'm a neurotic scatterbrain. That's what my mum called me the other day. Can you believe it? Once she calmed her overheated brain down, Safi decided to go to the church in Hanwell, the one her grandmother used to go to. Not to pray or anything, since she was an agnostic at best, just because it was so peaceful in there and it made her feel close to the old lady. Jemima, thin as a twig, myopic to a comic extent, bottle-thick specs, and with a cackling laugh like a crow. Safi missed her so much. Okay, that's way too maudlin. Let's get out of here. This place smells musty. I'm meeting the girls later tonight. Cocktails and some sort of futuristic crazy golf. Not my idea, Bella's. You'll like her. She's got a really filthy sense of humour. How am I going to stop her telling you about my love life, though? We had a snog once. We were really drunk. I could taste her menthol cigarettes. I'm not a lesbian. Really, I'm not. By the time her 3 days were over, Safi had packed in more than she'd usually do in a month. Well, she wasn't going to be outdone by a boy, after all. She'd been for runs, dinner, cocktails, even dancing. She'd watched a movie with Christina, who had a truly embarrassing laugh and drew tuts from the well-to-do couple behind them. She'd even cooked a romantic meal for 2 that she had the pleasure of eating alone. Well, sort of alone. At the end of day 3, Safi felt confident that she'd shown Lionel enough of her world to make up his mind. Whatever he chose to do now, he couldn't complain that he didn't know enough about her. She'd even epilated her legs. And, on night 3, 3 glasses of red wine in, an hour before bedtime, she decided she couldn't cope with going to bed all smelly and unkempt, and decided to have a shower. It was easy enough to wash herself without looking down, but she realised that he'd feel every contour of her body as she touched herself. She used a loofah instead of her hand for the body wash. No need to give away the goods too soon, as Granny used to say. That night she slept a sound, dreamless sleep, feeling him slip away from her like the last glimmer of dusk becoming proper night. After the operation to remove the neural lace, and after the end of study questionnaires, debrief and data crunching, there was to be a reunion event at the university. The researchers had hired out a grand ballroom for dinner and dance. It looked like it had been put together by someone trying to reconstruct a school prom from a pile of 90s teen comedies. Still, it provided a chance for the test subjects to celebrate, ask any final questions of the researchers, and, most vitally, meet one another's neural partners. Piggyback had decorated the hall with pink balloons, red hearts and cartoon pigs styled as Cupid, somehow achieving an effect midway between cute and embarrassing. Safi had bought a new dress, crimson, with a lot of cleavage. She'd got Bella to fit one of the amazing hairpieces, and now had long, flowing, shoulder-length locks. Real hair too, none of that ersatz nonsense. A red streak to coordinate with the dress. Passing a long mirror, Safi admitted that she looked pretty fantastic. She hadn't been sure Lionel would attend. 3 days before, he texted to say the event clashed with a friend's birthday. Then, Just this morning he texted very simply, "See you there, kiss." One kiss only. Normally Safi would have considered that perfunctory. Knowing what she did about Lionel, however, she could imagine him taking a moment out from something vital to fire off a quick message to put her mind at ease. Knowing this didn't make Safi any less nervous when she walked into the huge panelled echoey hall, however. She scanned the room, sidling around the walls, smiling thinly at other guests, all uniformly in their late 20s and 30s, all seemingly more comfortable and at home than she felt. "Hello? Safi?" The voice came from behind her, deep and resonant with a bit of hesitancy. She turned, and there he was, dressed to the nines, beaming at her. Safi didn't need to think. She flung her arms around Lionel, a man she already felt she knew. They'd spent only 6 days together without a single proper conversation, and yet he was just so familiar. And Safi had missed him. Lionel was vitally important to her present and future happiness. Lionel hugged her back without any self-consciousness at all. They said nothing as they held one another for a full 30 seconds. Nothing needed to be said. They already had been. And there we go. Wish fulfillment. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you stayed to the end. And I'll try and be more brief next time. I enjoyed writing that. It was fun. Plus, that has novel potential, that one. Maybe. Anyway, see you soon. Bye.